Danny Harper stared at the red warning lights flashing across the control panel and knew they were in serious trouble. The engine room of the Meridian was filling with smoke, and the main drive had just failed completely. They were drifting in space, and not just any space. They were at the edge of Kearshaw territory. "Captain, we need to send a distress signal," Danny said, trying to keep his voice steady. He was just a supply officer, not used to bridge duty, but half the crew was dealing with the engine fire below. Captain Lisa Grant stood at the center of the bridge, her face tight with worry. "If we send that signal into Kearshaw space, we might as well be signing our death warrants." Danny had heard the stories. Everyone in the galaxy had heard about the Kearshaw. They were massive beings that looked like the dragons from old Earth legends. Scales that glowed with strange light, wings that could create hurricane winds, and voices that could shake a ship apart. For over 60 years, the Galactic Council had tried to make contact with them. Every single attempt had failed. Ships that entered their territory were driven away by roars so powerful they disabled engines and cracked hull plating. The lucky ones escaped. The unlucky ones were never seen again. "Captain, if we don't get help soon, we won't have life support for more than 6 hours," said Kevin Ross from the pilot station. He was young, barely 25, and his hands shook as he worked the controls. Lisa looked around the bridge. Her crew was counting on her. "Send the signal. Mark it as a distress call. Not a diplomatic mission. Maybe they'll show mercy to a damaged ship." Danny watched as Kevin sent the message out. Then they waited. Minutes felt like hours. The smoke from below was being vented, but the damage was severe. Without the main engine, they couldn't move. They were sitting targets. "Captain, I'm picking up movement," said Claire Bennett from the science station. She was older than most of the crew, with gray hair and steady hands. 3 large objects approaching fast. "Can you identify them?" Lisa asked. Claire's face went pale. "They're Kearshaw. And they're big. Much bigger than our intelligence reports suggested." Danny moved to the viewport and looked out into the darkness of space. At first, he saw nothing. Then shapes began to emerge from the black. They were enormous, each one easily the size of the Meridian itself. Their scales caught the light from distant stars and seemed to glow from within, shifting colors from deep purple to bright gold. Wings that looked too delicate to support such massive bodies spread wide, and Danny could see they weren't just flying. They were gliding through space itself, moving with a grace that seemed impossible. "They're beautiful," he whispered. "They're also powering up something," Claire said sharply. "Energy readings are spiking. I think they're preparing to attack." Lisa straightened her uniform. "Open a channel. All frequencies. Open a channel." "Channel open, Captain. This is Captain Lisa Grant of the human vessel Meridian. We mean no harm. Our ship is damaged, and we need assistance. We are not a military threat. Please, we need help." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the lead Kearshaw opened its mouth. The sound that came out was like nothing Danny had ever heard. It started as a low rumble that he could feel in his chest, then rose to a screaming roar that made the entire ship shake. Warning alarms went off across the bridge. The viewport cracked. Danny fell to his knees, hands over his ears, but it did nothing to block out the sound. The roar went on for 10 seconds that felt like forever. When it finally stopped, Danny's ears were ringing. He looked up and saw that the other crew members were also on the floor. Blood was trickling from Claire's nose. "Shields are down," Kevin gasped. "That roar disrupted every system we have. We're completely defenseless." The Kearshaw circled the ship like predators around wounded prey. Lisa pulled herself back to her feet, using the captain's chair for support. "We need to try again. Keep the channel open." But before she could speak, the largest Kearshaw moved directly in front of the viewport. Its eyes were huge, burning with an inner fire that shifted from gold to red. It tilted its massive head, studying the humans inside their fragile ship. Then it spoke. The translator systems were barely functioning, but a few words came through in a voice like grinding stone. "Leave. Now, or die. We can't leave, Lisa said, gesturing to the dead engines. Please understand. We're stranded. We need time to repair. Another roar, shorter this time but just as powerful. More systems failed. The lights on the bridge flickered and went dim, switching to emergency power. Captain, they're going to tear us apart, Kevin said. Danny stood up slowly. His mind was racing. There had to be something. Some way to communicate. He thought about all the intelligence reports he had read while managing supplies. The Kir Shah had destroyed diplomatic ships, military vessels, even science expeditions. But why? What made them so hostile? Then he noticed something. Through the cracked viewport, he could see past the circling Kir Shah to their world below. The planet's surface was visible, and there were structures, not just random buildings, but organized settlements. And in the largest settlement, he could see what looked like a central plaza with smaller Kir Shah gathered around something. Claire, can you zoom in on that settlement? Danny asked. The sensors are barely working, but I'll try. She worked her controls, and a grainy image appeared on the main screen. The smaller Kir Shah were definitely gathered around something. It took Danny a moment to realize what he was seeing. They were eating. It was a communal feeding area. They value food, Danny said quietly. Look at how they're organized around that feeding ground. It's the center of their settlement. Lisa looked at him. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that every species we know has some form of food culture. Maybe they don't understand our words, but they might understand an offering. We don't have anything to offer them, Lisa said. Our cargo holds are damaged. Danny reached into his jacket and pulled out a small emergency pack. Every crew member carried one. Inside were basic rations, water purification tablets, and a few other supplies. But Danny's pack was different. He had customized it over the years. Instead of standard rations, he carried dried meats, small containers of spices, even a tiny portable heating unit. Cooking was his hobby, his way to relax after long shifts managing inventory. I have something, he said. Lisa stared at him. You want to cook for them? Danny, they're about to destroy us. Do we have any better options? The captain looked at the circling Kir Shah, then back at Danny. She let out a long breath. Kevin, how long until we lose life support completely? 4 hours, maybe less. And how long until those dragons out there lose patience? Could be any second, Captain. Lisa nodded slowly. All right, Danny. We'll try it your way. But we're not doing it from the ship. If you're going to make this gesture, it needs to be face to face. We take a shuttle down to their world. Danny's heart jumped. Going down to the surface was far more dangerous than staying on the ship. But the captain was right. A gesture made from behind shields and hull plating wouldn't mean anything. I'll need volunteers, Lisa said. Kevin stood up immediately. I'll fly the shuttle. Claire was slower to rise, still wiping blood from her nose, but her voice was firm. Someone needs to work the translator and record first contact properly. I'm going. Lisa looked at her small crew and smiled grimly. Then I guess we're doing this. Danny, grab whatever supplies you need. We leave in 10 minutes. As Danny ran to his quarters to gather his cooking equipment, he could hear the Kir Shah roaring outside the ship. Each roar made the walls shake. He packed quickly, taking every spice container he owned, his best knives, and all the dried meats and vegetables he had been saving. His hands were shaking, but not from fear. He was excited, terrified, yes, but also excited. This was either the stupidest idea anyone had ever had, or it was going to change everything. The shuttle bay was on the lower deck. Danny met the others there, carrying his supplies in 2 bags. The shuttle itself was small, designed for short trips between ships or down to planetary surfaces. It had minimal weapons and thin shields. If the Kir Shah wanted to destroy it, they could do so easily. Everyone ready? Lisa asked as they climbed aboard. No one answered. They didn't need to. Kevin started the engines, and the bay doors opened. Beyond was the darkness of space, and 3 massive dragons waiting for them. The shuttle launched, and immediately the Kirsha reacted. They turned as one, focusing on the small craft. Danny could see them clearly now through the shuttle's windows. Their scales weren't just glowing. They were pulsing with light in patterns that seemed almost like communication. "They're closing in," Kevin said, his voice tight. "Hold course for the planet," Lisa ordered. "Don't make any aggressive moves." The largest Kirsha, the one that had spoken before, moved directly into their path. Its mouth opened, and Danny knew another roar was coming. But before it could make a sound, the planet's surface came into view below them. The communal feeding area was visible, and suddenly the Kirsha seemed to hesitate. Claire was watching her instruments. "The translator is picking up something. Not words exactly, but patterns in their bioluminescence. I think they're confused about why we're heading for the surface instead of trying to fight or run." "Let's hope confusion buys us enough time," Lisa said. The shuttle descended through the atmosphere. The 3 Kirsha followed, but they didn't attack. They circled the shuttle like guards, or maybe like curious observers. Danny couldn't tell which. The landing pad was made of smooth stone that seemed to grow naturally from the ground. Kevin set the shuttle down gently, and for a moment, everyone just sat in silence. Through the windows, they could see dozens of Kirsha emerging from the surrounding structures. Some were as large as the ones that had intercepted them in space. Others were smaller, probably younger. All of them were staring at the shuttle. "Well," Lisa said quietly, "no turning back now. Let's go meet our hosts." The shuttle door opened with a hiss. Danny picked up his bags and followed the captain out onto the alien world. The air was warm and smelled like copper and flowers, a strange combination. The gravity was slightly heavier than Earth standard, making each step feel weighted. The largest Kirsha landed directly in front of them with an impact that shook the ground. Up close, it was even more magnificent and terrifying. Its scales were the size of dinner plates, each one carved with natural patterns that caught the light. Its eyes burned as they focused on the 4 humans. Then it roared. The sound hit Danny like a physical wall. He stumbled but managed to stay on his feet. His ears rang, and his vision blurred. But through it all, he noticed something. The roar wasn't just noise. There were layers to it, different tones and pitches woven together. It was language, just not one humans could understand, with their ears alone. The Kirsha stopped roaring and waited, clearly expecting the humans to flee or attack or do something. Instead, Danny set down his bags and pulled out his portable heating unit. The heating unit was small, designed for emergency situations, but it worked perfectly. Danny set it on the stone landing pad and began unpacking his ingredients. His hands were steady now. When he cooked, everything else faded away. The massive dragons, the damaged ship in orbit, the very real possibility of death. All of it became background noise to the familiar rhythm of preparation. He pulled out strips of dried meat first. They were from Earth, harvested from cattle raised in the agricultural zones of Luna Colony. Then came the spices: garlic powder, rosemary, black pepper, and a small jar of honey he had been saving for a special occasion. If this wasn't a special occasion, nothing was. The largest Kirsha, the one that had roared at them, took a step closer. Its massive head lowered, and Danny could feel the heat radiating from its body. The creature's nostrils flared wide, each one large enough for Danny to crawl into. It was sniffing the air. "Danny, what are you doing?" Lisa whispered urgently behind him. "Cooking," Danny said simply. He activated the heating unit and placed a flat metal surface on top of it. Within seconds, it was hot enough to cook on. He laid out the strips of meat, and immediately the smell of cooking protein filled the air. The reaction was instant. Every Kirsha in the area stopped moving. Heads turned toward Danny. The roaring ceased. Even the largest one, which Danny was starting to think of as the leader, went completely still. Danny worked quickly. He added the spices to the meat, watching as they released their aromas into the warm alien air. Garlic mixed with rosemary, creating a scent that was earthy and rich. He flipped the meat strips, making sure they cooked evenly. Then he drizzled honey over them, watching as it caramelized on the hot surface. "The translator is going crazy," Claire said quietly. She was standing behind Danny, watching her handheld device. "I'm picking up massive amounts of chemical communication. The Kirsha are talking to each other. But not with sound. They're using scent markers." "What are they saying?" Lisa asked. "I can't translate scent," Claire said. "But the patterns are complex. This isn't simple communication. This is detailed, nuanced conversation." The meat was ready. Danny carefully transferred it to a heat-resistant plate he had packed. The smell was incredible, even to him. The combination of honey and garlic created a glaze that looked golden in the alien sunlight. Steam rose from the meat, carrying the aroma outward. Danny stood up, holding the plate. He was face to face with the leader now, or at least face to chest. The Kirsha towered over him, its scales pulsed with light, shifting from gold to deep red and back again. For a moment, Danny wondered if those color changes were also a form of communication. He held out the plate, offering it. The Kirsha stared at him. Its eyes were huge, burning with that strange inner fire. Danny could see himself reflected in them, tiny and fragile. Then the creature's head lowered slowly, carefully. Its snout was as long as Danny was tall, covered in smaller scales that looked almost delicate. The nostrils flared again, taking in the scent of the cooked meat. A sound came from deep in the Kirsha's chest, but it wasn't a roar. It was something else, a rumbling purr that vibrated through the ground. Very carefully, almost delicately, the Kirsha opened its mouth. Teeth, the size of swords, became visible, but Danny forced himself not to flinch. He held the plate steady. A tongue, surprisingly pink and flexible, emerged and touched the meat. The Kirsha took a small piece, pulling it back into its mouth. Then, nothing. The creature stood completely still, eyes closed. Every other Kirsha in the area watched in absolute silence. Danny held his breath. The leader's eyes opened. The fire in them had changed, shifting to a warm gold color. Its scales pulsed in a pattern Danny hadn't seen before, rippling waves of light that flowed from head to tail. Then it made a sound. Not a roar, but something that the translator actually caught. Again, that single word sent a ripple through the watching Kirsha. Several of them moved closer, their own scales beginning to pulse with light. The leader stepped back slightly, making room, and Danny understood. They all wanted to try. "I need more supplies," Danny said, turning to Kevin and Lisa. "Everything I brought, bring it here." They didn't argue. Kevin ran back to the shuttle and returned with Danny's bags. Danny immediately started preparing more food. He had enough dried meat for maybe a dozen portions, but there were at least 30 Kirsha watching him now, with more arriving every minute. "Claire, can you ask them if they have any food here? Ingredients I can use?" Danny asked as he worked. Claire spoke into her translator, though Danny wasn't sure how much was getting through. To his surprise, several of the smaller Kirsha moved away quickly. They returned minutes later carrying things in their claws, strange fruits that glowed with soft purple light. Chunks of meat from creatures Danny didn't recognize. Plants with leaves that sparkled like metal. "I think they're offering ingredients," Claire said, wonder in her voice. They understood. Danny looked at the alien food. He had no idea if any of it was safe for humans to touch, let alone cook. But the Kirsha were waiting, watching him with those burning eyes. He made a decision. He picked up one of the glowing fruits and examined it. The skin was smooth, slightly warm. When he squeezed it gently, juice leaked out that smelled sweet, almost like vanilla. He cut the fruit open with his knife. The inside was filled with segments that looked similar to earth citrus. He took a tiny taste, ready to spit it out if it was toxic. Sweetness exploded on his tongue, along with something else. A flavor he couldn't quite identify. It was good. Really good. Danny added the fruit to his next batch of meat. He also tried the sparkling plant leaves, which turned out to have a peppery taste when crushed. The alien meat was darker than Earth beef, but smelled similar when heated. He worked with what he had, combining Earth spices with alien ingredients, creating dishes that had never existed before. The Kir Shah watched every move. When he plated the new combinations and offered them out, they approached carefully, one at a time. Each tasted the food with that same delicate care, and each time, their scales pulsed with changing colors and patterns. "I'm starting to understand," Claire said excitedly. She was recording everything on her device, making notes as fast as she could type. "The color patterns, they're not random. Watch when they taste something sweet. The scales turn gold. When they taste something spicy, they turn red. They're communicating what they taste through color." "So their whole body is part of their language?" Lisa asked. "I think so. And not just color. The scent markers, the sounds, even the way they move. It's all communication. But humans only have the tools to understand a fraction of it." Danny plated another dish and offered it to a younger Kir Shah that had been watching from the edge of the group. This one was smaller, maybe only twice Danny's height instead of 5 times. Its scales were brighter, shifting through colors faster than the adults. When it tasted the food, a combination of the alien meat with Earth rosemary and a glowing fruit reduction, its entire body lit up like a firework. Colors Danny didn't have names for rippled across its scales. The leader, watching this, made a sound that might have been approval. Then it spoke again. And this time the translator caught more words. "You are cookmaker? Food shaper?" "Yes," Danny said. "On my world, we call it being a chef." The translator struggled with the word chef, turning it into something that sounded like musical notes. The leader tilted its massive head, considering. Then it gestured with one enormous claw toward the feeding area Danny had seen from space. "Come, you see our food place." Lisa started to object, but Danny was already walking. The Kir Shah leader moved beside him, its steps careful to avoid crushing the small human. The other Kir Shah followed, creating a procession that wound through the settlement. Up close, the structures were incredible. They weren't built so much as grown. Crystalline formations that rose from the ground in spirals and arches. The Kir Shah moved between them with ease, their large bodies surprisingly graceful in the spaces that seemed designed for them. The feeding area was even more impressive than Danny had imagined. It was a massive, circular plaza, easily a quarter-mile across. In the center was what looked like a natural spring, but instead of water, it bubbled with something thick and dark. Around the spring were stationed what Danny could only call cooking areas. Stone surfaces heated from below, similar to his portable unit but much larger. Cutting areas with tools sized for claws instead of hands. Storage spaces built into the ground itself, but everything was dusty, unused. The whole place had the feeling of something abandoned. "You don't cook here anymore?" Danny asked. The leader's scales shifted to a dark blue color. "Sadness," Danny thought. "That's what that color means. Long ago we were flavor sharers. Food was our joy language. Then came the bitter time. A sickness that took our taste ability. Many flavors became lost dead to us. We could eat, but not enjoy, not communicate through food sharing as ancestors did." Claire was translating as the leader spoke, her device finally starting to understand the complex language. "Danny, I think they're saying they lost the ability to taste certain compounds. Some kind of plague or genetic disorder," the leader continued. "We became anger-filled. When others came, speaking word language we could not understand, offering things that meant nothing to our scent language, we drove them away. Better to be alone than to be reminded of what we lost." "But you can taste my cooking," Danny said. "Yes, your flavor combinations, they reach parts of our taste ability that we thought were gone dead. The earth plants you call spices, they create scent language we can understand again. Your food shaping has awakened something we thought lost forever." Danny looked around the abandoned feeding area and understood. The Kir Shah weren't hostile because they were violent. They were hostile because they were in pain. Every visitor reminded them of communication they could no longer fully participate in. Every diplomatic attempt was just more words they couldn't properly understand, more frustration, more loss. But food, properly prepared food with complex flavors and aromas, that was a language they could still speak. I can teach you, Danny said. The way I prepare food, the combinations of flavors and spices. I can share it with you. The leader's scales rippled through a dozen colors Danny was starting to recognize. Surprise, hope, caution, and something else. Gratitude, maybe. You would stay? Teach us your food-shaping ways? Danny looked at Lisa. The captain was watching him carefully. They both knew what this meant. The Meridian could be repaired eventually. The crew could go home. But this opportunity, this chance to make a real connection with a species that had been isolated for generations, it might never come again. If my captain agrees, yes, I'll stay and teach you. Lisa smiled. I think the Galactic Council will want you to stay, Danny. This is first contact done right. She tapped her communicator. Kevin, call the ship. Tell them to send down every food item we have in storage. And contact Council headquarters. Tell them we need human chefs, lots of them, and shipments of Earth spices. We're about to change history. The leader's scales turned pure gold, brighter than Danny had seen yet. It lowered its massive head until it was level with Danny's, close enough that he could feel the heat of its breath. You are small one, but you bring large gift. What is your name sound? Danny Harper. The translator turned it into something melodic, and the leader repeated it carefully. Then it spoke its own name. A combination of sounds that made the air vibrate, and colors that flowed across its scales. The translator gave up and just displayed it as Vorthax. Vorthax, Danny said, trying to pronounce it. The leader, Vorthax, made that purring sound again. You speak poorly, but you cook excellently. This is acceptable trade. Around them, the other Kirsha were already moving. The feeding area was coming back to life. Younger dragons were cleaning the cooking surfaces. Others were bringing ingredients from storage areas Danny hadn't even noticed. The whole settlement seemed to be awakening, energized by possibility. A smaller Kirsha approached, its scales a bright silver color. When it spoke, the voice was lighter, younger. I am Shira, daughter heir of Vorthax. Will you teach me your food-shaping ways? Danny grinned. I'd be happy to. Cooking is always better when you share it. And there, on an alien world, surrounded by dragons that had roared at every visitor for 60 years, Danny Harper began to teach his first cooking class. He started with the basics, showing Shira how to prepare the alien meat, how to combine spices to create complex flavors, how heat and time could transform simple ingredients into something amazing. The other Kirsha gathered to watch, their scales pulsing with colors that Claire's translator was starting to map. Interest was orange. Confusion was green. Joy was gold. And there was a lot of gold, as the lesson continued. By the time the twin suns began to set on the Kirsha homeworld, the feeding area was alive with activity. Dozens of dragons were attempting to cook, guided by one human who moved between them with patience and encouragement. The smell of cooking filled the air, a mix of earth and alien aromas that created something entirely new. And in orbit above, the crew of the Meridian worked to repair their ship, knowing that when they left, everything would be different. First contact had been made, not with weapons or formal words, but with food, friendship, and the simple act of sharing a meal. 3 months had passed since Danny Harper first cooked for the Kirsha. The feeding area that had been abandoned for generations now bustled with activity from dawn until dusk. Danny had set up a permanent kitchen facility using a combination of human technology and Kirsha natural heating systems. The result was a cooking space that would have made any Earth chef jealous. The ingredients available to him had expanded far beyond his initial supplies. The Kirsha had opened their storage facilities, revealing foods that had been preserved for centuries, using methods Danny was still trying to understand. Crystal root vegetables that grew underground and glowed with their own light. Phase shift grains that changed flavor based on how they were cooked, becoming sweet when baked but savory when boiled. Meat from 6-legged herd beasts that grazed on the purple grass of the northern plains. Danny stood at his main cooking station, teaching a group of young Kirsha the proper way to sear meat. Shira was his best student. her claws surprisingly delicate as she manipulated the cooking tools Danny had designed for her species. Other young dragons watched closely, their scales shifting colors as they absorbed the lesson. "The key is patience," Danny explained, checking Shira's work. "Don't move the meat too soon. Let it develop that brown crust. That's where the flavor lives." Shira's scales pulsed with concentration, a deep orange color that Danny had learned meant focus. She waited exactly as he had taught her, then flipped the meat with a practiced motion. The seared surface was perfect, golden brown, and aromatic. "Excellent work," Danny said. Shira's scales rippled with gold, the color of joy and pride. "You are a good teacher shaper, Danny Harper. My father chose well when he asked you to stay." As if summoned by his daughter's words, Vorthax landed in the feeding area. The massive leader had been away for several days, dealing with matters Danny wasn't privy to, but now he approached the kitchen, his scales showing colors Danny had learned to read. Gold for happiness, orange for curiosity. And underneath it all, a flicker of blue that meant concern. "Vorthax," Danny greeted him. "Welcome back. Are you hungry? We've been working on a new dish, using the crystal root vegetables." "Later, small friend," Vorthax said. His voice still made the ground vibrate, but Danny had gotten used to it. "First, we must speak of serious matters. A visitor comes." "What kind of visitor?" "A human one, from your Galactic Council. He comes with papers and word demands." Danny felt a weight settle in his stomach. He had known this was coming eventually. The Meridian had been repaired and had left 2 months ago, taking Captain Lisa Grant and most of the crew back to human space. But she had promised to send help, to turn Danny's informal cooking lessons into something official. Apparently, the council had finally responded. "When will he arrive?" Danny asked. "Soon, perhaps 1 sun cycle." That meant tomorrow in human terms. Danny nodded slowly. "I should prepare something special then. A meal to welcome him properly. Number 1. Tell you on him. I mean number 1. I mean number 1. I mean number 1 him." Vorthax's scales shifted to a color Danny hadn't seen before, a mix of red and blue that seemed to indicate frustration mixed with sadness. "This visitor. He is not like you, Danny Harper." The message he sent ahead, it spoke of formal negotiations and trade agreements. It did not speak of food sharing or culture learning. "He's a diplomat," Danny said. "That's his job, to make formal agreements. Will he roar at us with paper words we cannot understand? Will he try to force word language when we speak in scent taste?" Danny understood the concern. For 3 months, he and the Kirsha had been building something real. They communicated through food, through the shared experience of cooking and eating together. Formal diplomacy was different. It was about contracts and concessions, about what each side could extract from the other. "I'll talk to him," Danny promised. "Help him understand what we've built here." Vorthax lowered his massive head until he was eye level with Danny. "You have given us back something precious, small friend. You have awakened our joy language. I will not allow paper words to destroy that." The next day, a council shuttle landed on the same pad where Danny had first arrived. The man who emerged was exactly what Danny had expected. Ambassador Paul Winters was in his 50s, wearing a crisp diplomatic uniform covered in medals and insignia. His hair was perfect, his shoes polished, and his expression showed the confidence of someone who had negotiated hundreds of treaties. Danny met him at the landing pad, very aware that he was wearing a stained apron and smelled like the spiced fish he had been preparing for lunch. Behind him, a group of young Kirsha watched with undisguised curiosity, their scales flickering through various colors. "Lieutenant Harper," Winters said, offering a hand to shake. "I'm Ambassador Paul Winters. The council sent me to formalize relations with the Kirsha." "Good to meet you, Ambassador," Danny said, shaking his hand. "Welcome to the homeworld. Have you eaten?" "I was just preparing lunch." Winters blinked. "I appreciate the offer, but I have a tight schedule. I need to meet with the Kirsha leadership immediately and begin negotiations for a trade and defense pact." Danny kept his smile, but internally he was worried. Ambassador, maybe we should talk first. The Kirsha are different from other species. They don't respond well to traditional diplomatic approaches. I've read the reports, Lieutenant. I understand they prefer non-verbal communication. My team has prepared visual aids and scent samples to facilitate negotiations. That was something at least. Sir, it's more than just communication methods. The Kirsha culture centers around food and the sharing of it. Everything they do relates back to that. If you want to negotiate with them successfully, you need to understand that. Winters looked past Danny to the watching Kirsha. I appreciate your input, Lieutenant, but I've been doing this for 30 years. I know how to handle first contact situations. Now, if you could arrange a meeting with their leader, Danny sighed. Follow me. He led Winters through the settlement toward the council chamber, where Vorthax conducted official business. The young Kirsha followed, their scales showing orange curiosity mixed with red concern. They could sense the tension, even if Winters couldn't. Vorthax was waiting in the council chamber, a massive natural cave with walls that glowed with the same bioluminescence as Kirsha scales. He was surrounded by other elder dragons, their combined size making the huge chamber feel small. When Winters entered, several of them shifted their weight, a clear sign of discomfort. Honored Kirsha, Winters began, launching into what was clearly a prepared speech. I come, as an official representative of the Galactic Council, to negotiate a formal treaty between your species and the wider galactic community. We propose a trade agreement that would allow for the exchange of resources and technology, along with a mutual defense pact that would guarantee protection for both our peoples. Claire, who had stayed behind to continue her linguistic research, was translating. But Danny could see the colors shifting across the scales of every Kirsha in the chamber. Orange confusion, red irritation, and growing patches of deep blue sadness. Vorthax waited until Winters finished, then spoke. You bring word papers. You speak of trade-taking and defense fighting. But you do not speak of food sharing. You do not speak of culture learning. Why should we trust paper words from one who does not understand our joy language? Claire translated, and Winters frowned. With respect, I understand that your culture values food. I'm prepared to include agricultural trade in our agreement. We can exchange earth crops for your local produce. The colors in the chamber shifted to red. Several elder Kirsha rumbled low in their chests. It wasn't quite a roar, but it was close. He doesn't understand, Shira whispered to Danny. He speaks of trade-taking, not sharing-giving. He sees food as product objects, not as language communication. Danny stepped forward. Ambassador, maybe we should take a break. Let me prepare a meal for everyone. We can continue the negotiations over food. Lieutenant, I don't have time for a lunch break. We need to finalize these agreements and move on to the next system on my schedule. Vorthax stood to his full height, and suddenly the chamber felt very small. His scales shifted to pure red, and when he spoke, there was a rumble underneath his words that made the walls shake. You rush demand. You paper command. You do not honor our ways. Perhaps you should leave go. Winter's confident expression finally cracked. I apologize if I've offended, but surely you can see the value in formal diplomatic relations. Value? Vorthax's scales darkened. For 60 sun cycles, others came with value promises. They brought weapon trade and technology giving. They spoke word languages we could not understand, and grew angry, frustrated when we could not respond in kind. We roared at them all, drove them away, because they saw us as obstacle problems to be solved, not as people beings to be known. He gestured toward Danny with one massive claw. Then this small one came. He brought no weapons, no technology, no paper demands. He brought flavor gifts and patience teaching. He learned our joy language and taught us his. He gave us back something we thought lost forever. That is true value. Winters looked at Danny, and for the first time, there was uncertainty in his eyes. Lieutenant, what exactly have you been doing here for 3 months? Cooking, sir. Teaching cooking and learning about Kirsha culture. They're not hostile. They're just frustrated because everyone keeps trying to communicate in ways they can't fully understand. Food is their primary language. When you share a meal with them, you're not just eating, you're having a conversation. The ambassador was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Show me." Danny led Winters and the Kearshaw elders back to the feeding area. The young dragons scattered as the group approached. But Shira stayed, her scales showing gold excitement at the prospect of cooking for the ambassador. "What we're making today," Danny explained as he began pulling out ingredients, "is a fusion dish. It combines earth cooking techniques with Kearshaw ingredients. Shira has been helping me develop it." He and Shira worked together, their movements synchronized from months of practice. They prepared the six-legged beast meat, using a marinade Danny had created from earth spices and the juice of glowing fruits. The crystal root vegetables were cut into precise pieces and roasted until their natural luminescence intensified. The phase shift grains were prepared in a way that brought out their sweetness, creating a contrast to the savory meat. As they cooked, Danny talked. The Kearshaw lost the ability to taste certain flavor compounds during a plague generations ago. It cut them off from a major part of their cultural identity. Food wasn't just sustenance to them, it was how they communicated complex emotions and ideas. Imagine if humans suddenly lost the ability to use half our vocabulary. We'd be frustrated too. Winters watched in silence as the meal came together. The smells filling the air were incredible. A mix of familiar earth aromas and strange alien scents that somehow worked together perfectly. But earth spices, Danny continued, they contain compounds the Kearshaw can still taste. When I combine them with local ingredients, it creates flavor profiles that speak to the Kearshaw in ways they haven't experienced in generations. The food was ready. Danny and Shira plated 7 dishes, one for each of the Kearshaw elders and one for Ambassador Winters. Danny didn't take a portion for himself. This meal wasn't about him. "When you eat," Danny said to Winters, "watch their scales. The colors are part of how they communicate what they're tasting. Gold is joy. Red is strong flavor. Spicy or intense. Blue is subtle, delicate. Orange is complex, layered." You're not just eating a meal. You're participating in a conversation. Form 2, creating, Sing 6, Mao, Andon. Winters picked up his fork and took a bite. His eyes widened. The food was exceptional, the kind of dish that would have earned awards in any Earth restaurant. But that wasn't the point. He looked up and saw the Kearshaw elders eating as well, their scales rippling with colors that flowed and mixed like living art. Vorthax's scales showed gold and orange swirling together. Satisfaction and appreciation for complexity. Another elder showed red and blue, enjoying the contrast of intense and subtle flavors. Shira, watching proudly, glowed pure gold. "They're talking to each other," Winters said quietly, "through the colors, and through scent markers we can't detect," Claire added. She had followed the group and was recording everything. Each flavor combination triggers specific chemical releases that the Kearshaw can smell and interpret. It's like each bite of food is a sentence, and the whole meal is a conversation. Winters ate slowly, watching the display of colors around him. When he finished, he set down his fork and looked at Danny. "I've been doing this wrong." "Sir?" "Diplomacy. I've been approaching this like every other treaty negotiation. Lay out the terms, highlight the benefits, get signatures, but that's not what the Kearshaw need." He turned to Vorthax. "You don't want a trade agreement. You want a relationship." Vorthax's scales shifted to gold. "Now, you begin to understand. See. Paper words are empty without trust building. And trust building comes from shared experience, not from exchange transactions." Winters nodded slowly. "Then perhaps we should start over. Not with a treaty, but with more meals. More conversations through food. More learning about each other." "That would be wise good," Vorthax said. His scales rippled with approval. Over the following days, Danny organized a series of feasts. Ambassador Winters attended each one. And slowly, his formal diplomat demeanor softened. He learned to read the color language of the Kearshaw scales. He started to understand that the rumbles and roars weren't aggression, but emphasis, like a human raising their voice for effect. Most importantly, he learned to cook. Shira taught him, with Danny supervising. The ambassador's first attempts were disasters, but the Kirshah found his failures endearing rather than frustrating. Each mistake became a shared joke, each improvement a cause for celebration marked by rippling gold scales. On the seventh day, Vorthox called everyone together in the feeding area. The entire settlement had gathered. Hundreds of Kirshah, of all ages. Their combined bioluminescence made the area glow like a sunset. "We have decided," Vorthax announced. "We will join the Galactic Council. Not because of paper promises or trade value, but because of shared meals and culture learning. Because of trust building and friendship making." The Kirshah around him pulsed with gold light. A wave of joy that spread through the crowd. Winters stood beside Danny. And for once, the polished diplomat looked genuinely moved. "On behalf of the council," Winters said, "we welcome you. And I promise that we will honor your culture and your ways. No more rushing. No more demands. Just partnership." Vorthax extended one massive claw, and Winters reached out to touch it. The formal gesture complete, the leader turned to Danny. "You, small friend, have changed everything. You came with cooking gifts when others came with weapon threats. You listened when others demanded. You shared when others took. The Kirshah name you as honored friend for all generations." Danny felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you, Vorthox. Teaching your people has been the greatest honor of my life." Shira stepped forward, her scales showing a mix of gold and blue, joy tinged with sadness. "Will you go now, Danny Harper? Return to your sky home?" "I'll have to go eventually," Danny admitted. "But not yet. I still have so much to learn about Kirshah cuisine. And you still have more to learn from me." Then we feast," Vorthax declared. "We feast to celebrate new friendship and old traditions made new again. We feast because that is what civilized beings do when word language fails. We feast because sharing food is sharing souls, and souls speak all languages." The settlement erupted in celebration. Cooking fires were lit across the feeding area. Humans and Kirshah worked side by side, preparing dishes that combined the best of both cultures. The air filled with aromas and colors, conversation spoken in scent and taste, and the universal language of shared joy. And at the center of it all, a human chef and a dragon princess worked together, creating food that would nourish not just bodies, but the bonds between two species that had finally learned to speak the same language. 6 months after the first feast, word of the human-Kirshah alliance had spread throughout the galaxy. Danny Harper's name was known on 100 worlds, though most species couldn't quite believe the stories. A human chef had succeeded where armed fleets and veteran diplomats had failed. It seemed impossible. Yet the evidence was clear. The Kirshah, isolated and hostile for generations, had opened their borders and joined the Galactic Council. Other species wanted to understand. Research teams arrived, asking for interviews. Trade delegations came seeking agreements. Scientists wanted to study the Kirshah communication methods. For the most part, Vorthax welcomed them, as long as they respected the protocols Danny had established. Share a meal first. Learn the basics of food language. Show respect for Kirshah culture. But not everyone came with good intentions. Danny was in the kitchen teaching a class on sauce preparation when the alert came. The Kirshah Defense Network had detected a large fleet entering their system, 20 warships, heavily armed, moving in battle formation. They were Zrathian vessels. The Zrathians were a problem species in galactic politics. They were militaristic, expansionist, and believed that power came from strength alone. They had been trying to expand into Kirshah territory for decades, blocked only by the dragons' fierce defense of their borders. Now that the Kirshah had allied with the Council, the Zrathians saw an opportunity slipping away. Vorthox called an emergency council meeting. Danny attended, along with Ambassador Winters. who had extended his stay to oversee the integration process. The elder Kir Shah gathered in their council chamber, scales showing various shades of red, the color of concern and potential conflict. The Zrathians demand an audience, Vorthak said, his voice making the walls vibrate. Their war leader, Kraz Thor, says we must submit to Zrathian authority or face destruction. He claims the council agreement is invalid because we did not consult with the Zrathian collective. That's nonsense, Winters said. The Zrathians aren't part of the council. They have no say in our membership decisions. They have warships. One of the elder Kir Shah pointed out. 20 of them. Our defenses are strong, but we would suffer losses in a fight conflict. Danny had been listening quietly, but now an idea was forming. Vorthax, you said they want an audience. Have they actually attacked yet? No. Krazthor demands we meet with him. He speaks word demands, threatens ship violence, but has not yet fired weapons. Then he's here to intimidate, not fight. He wants you to submit without a battle. Danny stood up, his mind racing. What if we don't give him what he expects? You speak riddles, small friend, Vorthax said. I mean, what if we don't respond with either submission or aggression? What if we do what we've been doing all along? We invite them to share a meal. The council chamber fell silent. Several elder Kir Shah looked at Danny as if he had suggested something insane. Winters was shaking his head. Danny, the Zrathians aren't like the Kir Shah. They don't value cultural exchange. They value power and dominance. Offering them food will look like weakness, or it will look like confidence. Danny countered. Think about it. They come here expecting fear or defiance. Instead, we're so secure in our position that we invite them to dinner. That's not weakness, that's strength. Vorthax's scales shifted through several colors, finally settling on orange, the color of deep thought. The small one speaks wisdom truth. We could destroy their ships, but that would make them martyr heroes to their people. More would come seeking revenge violence. But if we win without fighting, if we show them a better way, they might actually listen, Danny finished. Or at least they won't be able to claim we were hostile. The whole galaxy is watching. If the Zrathians attack a species that offered them hospitality, they'll lose political support from neutral systems. Shira, who had been standing near her father, spoke up. I agree with Danny Harper. Let them come to the feeding area. Let them see what we have built. If they still choose violence destruction after seeing joy sharing, then we fight knowing we tried peace offering first. The elder Kir Shah debated for another hour, but eventually they reached consensus. They would invite the Zrathians to a feast, but they would also keep their defenses ready, just in case. The message was sent to the Zrathian fleet. Krazthor's response came quickly, and it dripped with contempt. He would come to their planet with his personal guard. They would eat their food, and then the Kir Shah would submit to Zrathian authority or be destroyed. It wasn't exactly the spirit of cultural exchange Danny had hoped for, but it was a start. 3 days later, a Zrathian shuttle landed on the main pad. Krazthor emerged first, a towering figure in black armor decorated with battle honors. The Zrathians were humanoid, but larger and bulkier than baseline humans. Their skin was rough, covered in ridge patterns that served as natural armor. Krazthor's face was scarred, his eyes cold and calculating. Behind him came 20 Zrathian warriors, each one armed and armored. They spread out in a defensive formation, weapons not drawn but hands resting on them in clear threat. Danny stood at the entrance to the feeding area with Vorthax, Shira, and Ambassador Winters. He had spent the last 3 days preparing for this moment, planning a menu that would showcase the best of both human and Kir Shah cuisine, while also demonstrating the cultural fusion that had been achieved. War leader Krazthor, Vorthax said formally. Welcome to our home world. We offer you food sharing and peace talking. Krazthor looked around at the feeding area, at the cooking stations, and the gathered Kir Shah, whose scales were rippling with nervous colors. His expression was one of disdain. "I did not come here to play at cooking games," he said. His voice was harsh, used to giving commands that would be obeyed without question. "I came to deliver terms. The Kirsha territory will be administered by the Zrathian Collective. You will provide us with mining rights to your resource-rich moons. In exchange, we will allow you to remain on this world under our protection." "That's not protection," Winters said sharply. "That's occupation." Krasthor turned his cold gaze on the ambassador. "You are human. This does not concern you. Stay out of Zrathian affairs. The Kirsha are members of the Galactic Council," Winters replied, not backing down despite being half Krasthor's size. "That makes this council business. The council is weak. It values talk words over action strength. The galaxy belongs to those with the power to take it." Danny had been watching the Zrathian warriors while their leader spoke. They stood in formation, disciplined and ready, but several of them were glancing at the cooking stations with curiosity. One younger warrior, standing slightly behind the others, was actually watching Shira as she prepared vegetables, his eyes tracking her movements with clear interest. "War leader," Danny said, stepping forward. "You came here to show your strength. You've done that. Your fleet is impressive. Your warriors are clearly well-trained. Now let us show you what we've built here. Give us 2 hours, share a meal with us. Then, if you still want to make demands, we'll hear them." Krasthor looked at Danny as if noticing him for the first time. "You are the human cook. The one who supposedly tamed the dragons with food making." "I didn't tame anyone," Danny said. "I just helped them remember something they had lost. And I think you might be surprised by what we can show you." "You waste my time." 2 hours, Danny pressed. "If the Zrathian Collective is as strong as you claim, surely you can spare 2 hours. Unless you're afraid of what a simple meal might reveal." It was a calculated insult, questioning Krasthor's courage. The war leader's face darkened, and for a moment Danny thought he had pushed too far. But then Krasthor smiled, showing teeth filed to points. "Very well, human cook. I will sit at your table. I will eat your food, and then I will show you that strength, not flavor, determines who rules." He gestured to his warriors. "We stay armed." "As you wish," Vorthak said. "But know that violence in our feeding place is the greatest dishonor. Attack here. And even if you win, the galaxy will know you as oathbreakers and cowards." Krasthor's smile didn't waver. "We will not attack first, but we will not disarm either." It was as much as they were going to get. Danny nodded to Shira and the other young Kirsha, who had been preparing for days. It was time to begin. The meal Danny had planned was 7 courses, each one representing a different aspect of the human-Kirsha partnership. The first course was simple. A statement of intentions. Bread from earth grains, served warm with a spread made from the glowing fruits of the Kirsha homeworld. It symbolized the basic foundation, the simple act of sharing food between different cultures. The Zrathian warriors sat at a long table that had been constructed for the occasion. Krasthor took the head position, his warriors arrayed around him. They looked uncomfortable, used to mess halls and ration packs, not formal dining. But they ate the bread when it was served, and Danny saw several of them pause, surprised by the quality. The second course was soup, a rich broth made from 6-legged beast bones, seasoned with earth herbs and thickened with phase shift grains. It was served in bowls that the Kirsha had crafted specifically for beings with hands rather than claws. The warmth and complexity of flavors seemed to catch the Zrathians off guard. "This is adequate," Krasthor admitted grudgingly. "Better than military rations. But food does not change reality. You still lack the strength to resist us. Strength takes many forms," Vorthax rumbled. "A warrior who only knows how to fight destroy is weak in all other areas. A true leader must know when to fight and when to build create." The third course was where Danny started to take risks. He prepared the meat course in front of them, working at a cooking station where everyone could see. Shira worked beside him, her movements practiced and confident. the young Zrathian warrior Danny had noticed earlier, whose name tag identified him as Vex-Il, watched with undisguised fascination. "May I ask a question?" Vex-Il said suddenly. Krozthor shot him a warning look, but Danny answered before the war leader could silence him. "Of course. Why do you cut the meat that way? Against the grain instead of with it?" Danny smiled. "Good eye. Cutting against the grain breaks down the muscle fibers, makes the meat more tender. It's a simple technique, but it makes a big difference in the final dish." "Could I try?" Vex-Il asked. The feeding area went silent. A Zrathian warrior was asking to cook. Krozthor's face darkened with anger. But all eyes were on him now, including those of his own warriors. If he denied the request, he would look like a tyrant afraid of his own soldiers learning something new. "You may watch," Krozthor said tightly. "But do not embarrass yourself or your unit." Vex-Il stood and approached the cooking station. Danny handed him a knife and a piece of meat, showing him the proper angle and technique. The young Zrathian's first attempt was clumsy, but his second was better. By the third piece, he was cutting cleanly and confidently. "You learn quickly," Shira said, her scales showing gold approval. "We Zrathians are warriors," Vex-Il said. "But warriors must eat. Knowing how to prepare food well is a useful skill. A very useful skill," Danny agreed. He showed Vex-Il how to season the meat, how to control the heat, how to know when it was perfectly cooked. The young warrior absorbed it all, asking smart questions, showing genuine interest. The other Zrathian warriors were watching now too, leaning forward despite themselves. One by one, they began asking questions. "What spice was that? How did you make that sauce? Why did the grain change flavor when you cooked it differently?" Krozthor sat at the table, his meal growing cold in front of him, watching as his disciplined warriors became students in a cooking class. His expression was unreadable, but his hands clenched into fists on the table. The fourth, fifth, and sixth courses continued the transformation. Each dish was more complex than the last, showcasing techniques that required precision and patience. The Zrathian warriors, despite their initial resistance, became engaged. They tasted thoughtfully, discussed flavors, even debated which dish was best. Food was a universal language, Danny had told Vorthax once. He was seeing the proof of it now. The seventh and final course was dessert, a fusion creation that Danny was particularly proud of. He had taken earth chocolate and combined it with crystallized sweeteners from the Kirshah homeworld, creating something that was both familiar and entirely new. Served warm, the dessert was rich without being overwhelming, sweet but with complex undertones that kept revealing themselves with each bite. Krozthor took a bite of the dessert. His expression didn't change, but he took another bite, and another. He finished the entire portion in silence, then set down his spoon. "You have proven your point, human cook," he said quietly. "This food is exceptional. The techniques are impressive. The fusion of cultures is admirable." "Then you'll withdraw your demands?" Winters asked hopefully. Krozthor stood, and his warriors immediately rose with him, the moment of cultural connection broken by military discipline. "No. Because while your food is impressive, it does not change the fundamental equation. The Kirshah have resources we need. You have demonstrated culture, yes. Artistry. But in the end, the strong take what they require. That is the way of the universe." Danny felt his heart sink. It hadn't worked. Despite everything, despite the meal and the connection and Vex-Il learning to cook, Krozthor was unmoved. But then Vex-Il spoke up. "War leader, permission to speak freely." "Denied," Krozthor said sharply. "With respect, sir, I'm speaking anyway." Vex-Il stepped forward, his posture respectful but firm. "You sent us here to intimidate, to show strength, but we've just experienced something our people have never had. We've been welcomed, taught, treated as guests rather than threats. And yes, we're strong enough to take what we want by force. But what have we built? What have we created? The Zarathian Collective controls 17 systems. But what do those systems give us, besides resources and strategic positions? The Kirsha and humans, they've built something here that can't be taken by force. They've built understanding, partnership. That's a different kind of strength. Other Zarathian warriors were nodding. Several looked ashamed, as if seeing their mission clearly for the first time. Krozthor's voice was ice. You forget your place, soldier. No, sir. I remember what we're supposed to be. Warriors defend. They protect. They build security for their people, but conquest for its own sake, taking what others have built instead of creating our own value. That's not warrior behavior. That's just theft. The war leader and the young warrior stared at each other for a long moment. Then, slowly, Krozthor's expression changed. The cold calculation melted slightly, revealing something underneath. Respect. Maybe. Or recognition. You speak boldly, Krozthor said. You taught me to speak truth, sir. You said a warrior who cannot question his orders is just a tool, not a thinking being. Krozthor turned to Vorthax. Your food has corrupted my warriors. They come here as soldiers and leave as philosophers. Is that corruption? Vorthax asked. Or growth evolution? For the first time since arriving, Krozthor laughed. It was a harsh sound, but genuine. Perhaps both. He looked at Danny. You have not won a battle here, human, but you have started something more dangerous than any fight. You have made us curious about you, about your ways, about what can be built through cooperation instead of conquest. Is that such a bad thing? Danny asked. For a war leader whose entire career has been built on expansion? Yes, it is terrible. Krozthor smiled grimly. But perhaps necessary. He turned to his warriors. We withdraw. No demands, no occupation. But I take something more valuable with me. He picked up the recipe cards that Danny had placed at each seat, showing how to prepare the dessert course. I will make this for the collective leadership, Krozthor said. And I will tell them about what I saw here. Not warriors conquering dragons, but cultures building something new together. Let them chew on that idea, along with their chocolate. He saluted Vorthax in the Zarathian military fashion, fist to chest. Then he nodded to Danny and Winters. You are either the bravest beings in the galaxy or the most foolish. Time will tell which. But you have earned our respect, if not our submission. The Zarathian warriors filed back to their shuttle. But Vexil lingered for a moment. He approached Shira. Thank you for the lesson. I hope we meet again. Under better circumstances. Shira's scales rippled gold and blue. May your path be flavored with discovery. Vexil of the Zarathians. As the shuttle lifted off and rejoined the fleet in orbit, the Zarathian warships began to withdraw from the system. Vorthax watched them go, his scales showing a complex mix of colors that Danny had learned meant relief, mixed with thoughtful concern. They will be back someday, the great dragon said. But next time, perhaps they will come to trade ideas instead of making demands. That is progress. Danny sat down heavily, the tension of the last few hours catching up with him. That was too close, but it worked, Winters said. He was smiling broadly. Danny, you just prevented a war with dessert. The council is never going to believe this. Shira brought Danny a cup of the sweet drink the Kirsha made from fermented fruit. You were wise to offer feast-sharing instead of fight-threatening, teacher. But I do not think all conflicts will be solved with food-making. No, Danny agreed. But every conflict should at least start with the attempt. Because once you've shared a meal with someone, once you've taught them and learned from them, it's a lot harder to see them as just an enemy to be destroyed. Vorthax rumbled his agreement. The small one speaks great wisdom from a small package. This is why we value him. And on the distant horizon, the last Zarathian ship vanished into hyperspace, taking with them recipes and ideas that would change their culture in ways no one could yet predict. The galaxy was learning, slowly, that there were different kinds of strength, and sometimes the sharpest weapon was a well-prepared meal shared in good faith. 9 months had passed since Danny Harper first landed on the Kearshaw homeworld. In that time, everything had changed. The feeding area that had once been abandoned now operated around the clock. Human chefs had arrived from Earth and the colonies, eager to learn from Danny and teach the Kearshaw their own specialties. The cultural exchange program had become the pride of the Galactic Council, proof that different species could find common ground through shared experience rather than just political treaties. But the message that arrived on a cold morning promised something bigger. The Galactic Council wanted to host a unity feast, bringing together representatives from 12 major species to celebrate the growing cooperation between different cultures, and they wanted Danny to organize it. Danny read the message 3 times, sitting in the small quarters he had built near the main kitchen. 12 species, each with different biology, different dietary needs, different cultural taboos. Some breathed oxygen, others required methane atmospheres. The Vryn Collective and the Talmor Alliance would both be attending, and those 2 species had fought a bitter war just 30 years ago. Tensions between them were still high. "This is impossible," Danny muttered. "Nothing is impossible," Shira said from the doorway. She had grown even larger over the months, her scales now showing the deeper colors of maturity. "Just very difficult. 12 species, Shira. I'd need a miracle to make this work. Then we make miracle happen together." "You are not alone in this, teacher." Danny looked up at his first student and smiled. "You're right. I'm going to need help. A lot of help." Over the next week, Danny assembled his team. Shira volunteered immediately, along with a dozen other young Kearshaw, who had become skilled cooks under his guidance. Ambassador Winters used his political connections to bring in human chefs from across known space. Maria Santos arrived from New Manila, an expert in adaptogenic cuisine who had spent years developing dishes that could be safely consumed by multiple species. Jacob Lee came from the research station on Titan, bringing his knowledge of alien biology and nutritional requirements. And to Danny's surprise, a Zrathian shuttle landed 3 days into the planning. Vexil emerged, carrying cooking equipment and a message from Kraz Thor. "The war leader says that if you are trying to unite the galaxy through food, the Zrathians should contribute," Vexil explained. "He sent me to offer our techniques and ingredients. Also, he wants me to learn more. He says knowing how to feed people is as important as knowing how to fight for them." Danny welcomed him gladly. The team was coming together. They had 3 weeks to prepare. The Unity Hall on the Council's central station had been reserved, a massive space that could be configured for different atmospheric requirements. The challenge was creating a menu that everyone could participate in, at least partially. Some species were pure carnivores. Others were herbivores. The methane breathers couldn't consume anything the oxygen breathers could, and vice versa. "We need to think in layers," Maria suggested during one planning session. "Courses that can be customized for each species, but that share core elements so everyone is experiencing the same meal, just adapted to their biology. Like a theme with variations," Jacob added. "The musical structure is the same, but each species gets their own instrumental version." Danny liked that idea. They started building the menu around it. 7 courses, each one representing a different aspect of unity. The first course would be appetizers that all 12 species could consume, a scientific miracle that Jacob was confident he could achieve using specially prepared proteins and neutral compounds. The remaining courses would be increasingly complex, requiring cooperation between species to fully appreciate. But the real challenge came 2 weeks into preparation. The Vryn and Talmor delegates sent messages listing their requirements, and those requirements were in direct conflict. The Vryn insisted on having their traditional seating arrangement, which placed them at the head of the table. The Talmor had a similar tradition. Both species saw it as a matter of cultural pride. "If we seat one above the other, the slighted species will walk out before the meal even starts," Winters warned. "We've been trying to get these 2 to even sit in the same room for 3 years. Danny stared at the seating chart, his mind racing through possibilities. Traditional solutions wouldn't work. They needed something new. Something that neither species could object to without looking unreasonable. "What if we don't have a head of the table?" he said slowly. "What if the table is round, with each species section equal to the others? No one is above anyone else." "The symbolism would be powerful," Winters admitted. "But you'd still need to decide who sits where around the circle. First position, second position. They'll argue about that too. Then we randomize it," Shira suggested. "Make it chance-determined. No one can claim favoritism if the placements are random." 8. Those are open favoritism. It was risky, but it might work. Danny sent the proposal to both species. There was a tense 3 days of waiting, then both agreed, though their messages dripped with reluctance. It was progress. The week before the feast, disaster struck. Jacob ran into the kitchen, where Danny was testing recipes, his face pale. "We have a problem. A big one." "What is it?" "The Kelvin. They're silicon-based life forms." "I knew that. I'd accounted for that. But I just found out they also emit low-level radiation as part of their digestive process. Nothing dangerous to them. But if they're seated near the Whisper folk, who are extremely radiation-sensitive, we could have a medical emergency during the meal." Danny felt his carefully constructed plan beginning to crumble. "Can we seat them far apart?" "The round table configuration doesn't allow for it. They're directly adjacent in the randomized seating. We could re-randomize, but that would require getting approval from all 12 species again, and we don't have time." Danny sat down heavily. There had to be a solution. There always was. He just needed to find it. "What if we shield the Whisper folk section?" Maria suggested. "A transparent barrier that blocks radiation, but allows conversation and sight lines? That would make them look like they're in quarantine." Winters objected. "They'd see it as an insult." "Then we shield everyone," Danny said suddenly. "We tell all the species that, for safety and comfort, each section will have customized environmental controls. With transparent barriers, the oxygen breathers get optimal oxygen mix, the methane breathers get their atmosphere, the radiation-sensitive get shielding. We make it about customization, not isolation." Jacob nodded slowly. "That could work. It would actually make the meal more comfortable for everyone. But the engineering challenge of setting up 12 different micro-environments in one space, that's intense." "The Council has the resources," Winters said. "I'll make it happen." The day of the Unity Feast arrived. Danny hadn't slept in 36 hours. The kitchen team had been preparing around the clock, creating components that could be assembled into courses for each species. The Unity Hall had been transformed, the round table installed with sophisticated environmental controls at each section. The delegates began arriving. The Vryn came first, tall and crystalline, their bodies refracting light in beautiful patterns. The Talmor followed, covered in soft fur that changed colors with their emotions. The Kelvin flowed into their section like living metal. The Whisper folk appeared as barely visible distortions in the air, their presence known more by feeling than sight. Each species was different. Some were familiar, having regular contact with humans and the Council. Others were exotic, their very existence challenging Danny's understanding of what life could be. But they were all here, all willing to participate in this experiment. Vorthax attended as the Kirshaw representative, his massive form barely fitting in the section designed for his species. He caught Danny's eye across the hall, and his scales rippled with encouraging gold. Ambassador Winters gave the opening speech, welcoming everyone and explaining the significance of the meal. "We gather not as separate species claiming separate territories, but as members of a shared galaxy seeking shared understanding. The food you will eat tonight was prepared by beings from 6 different worlds, working together. Let it remind us of what we can achieve when we cooperate." The first course was served. Danny watched nervously as each species received their adapted version of the appetizer. The base was a protein that Jacob had engineered specifically to be digestible by all 12 species, flavored with compounds that would register as pleasant across vastly different sensory systems. The Vryn delegate took a bite. Their crystalline structure pulsed with light. It was working. The Talmor tried theirs. and their fur shifted to warm colors. One by one, each species tasted the food. Approval rippled around the table in 12 different forms. Danny let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. The first hurdle was cleared. The second course was soup, adapted for each species' requirements but sharing a common base of nutrients and flavors. The third course was where things got interesting. It required cooperation. The Vryn had to prepare part of the dish at their station, then pass it to the Talmor, who would complete it before consuming. The idea was that the final dish only reached its full potential when both species worked together. Danny watched the two ancient enemies face each other across their environmental barriers. For a moment, nothing happened. Then an elderly Vryn chef stood and began preparing his portion of the dish. His movements were practiced, skilled. When he finished, he slid the half-prepared meal through a special airlock to the Talmor section. A Talmor chef, her fur showing colors that Danny's translator said indicated nervousness, received the dish. She completed the preparation, adding ingredients from her culture, using techniques passed down through generations. When she plated it, the dish was beautiful, a true fusion of both cultures. The Talmor chef tasted it first. Her fur exploded with colors, joy, and surprise mixed together. She prepared a portion for the Vryn chef who had started it. He tasted it, and his crystalline form pulsed with light that seemed to match the Talmor's fur patterns. "This is," the Vryn chef's translator struggled. "This is exceptional. Your technique with the heat variation, it brought out flavors in my base preparation that I did not know existed. Your choice of the primary ingredient was inspired," the Talmor chef replied. "It provided a structure that my spices could enhance rather than overwhelm." They were talking. Actually talking. Not as diplomats reading prepared statements, but as chefs discussing their craft. Around the table, other species were doing the same, sharing the collaborative dishes, discovering new flavors, new techniques, new possibilities. The fourth, fifth, and sixth courses continued the theme. Each required interaction between species, sharing of knowledge, cooperation to achieve the best result. The barriers between sections remained, necessary for survival, but they seemed less important now. What mattered was what was being created through the collaboration. Then came the seventh course, and with it, the crisis Danny had been dreading. He was in the kitchen, supervising the final preparations, when he heard raised voices from the dining hall. He ran out to find the Vryn and Talmor delegates standing, their body language aggressive despite the barriers between them. "What happened?" Danny asked Winters, who was trying to calm the situation. "Old grievance," the ambassador said quietly. "One of the Vryn mentioned a battle from the war." The Talmor took offense. "It's escalating." Danny pushed through to the table. The Vryn delegate was speaking, his translator turning his crystalline tones into harsh words. "Your people attacked civilian settlements. You have no moral ground to stand on. That was propaganda." The Talmor delegate shot back, her fur turning angry red. "Your fleet bombed our colonies. We have documentation." "Forged documentation. Your government has always lied." Around the table, other species were watching uneasily. The whole feast, everything they had built, was collapsing. Danny didn't think. He just acted. He grabbed the dessert course he had been preparing, meant to be served last, and brought it to the center of the table. It was his masterpiece. Weeks of work condensed into a single dish. Earth chocolate combined with Kir Shah, crystallized sweeteners, Zrathian spiced fruits, and elements from 6 other cultures. It required precise temperature control, careful timing, and cooperation between at least 4 species to prepare correctly. "Stop," Danny said loudly. Both delegates turned to look at him. "Before you continue this argument, before you destroy what we've built here tonight, I want you to try this." He plated 2 portions, one adapted for Vryn biology, one for Talmor. He sent them through the airlocks to each delegate. "This dish," Danny continued, "was created by Shira, Vexil, Maria, and me working together. 4 species, 4 different approaches to cooking, combined into something none of us could have created alone. But there's something special about it. Something I need you to understand." The delegates looked at their portions suspiciously but didn't taste them yet. The base chocolate is from Earth, Danny explained. But the process of making it was taught to me by a Vryn chef who visited our homeworld 3 months ago. Your people, he looked at the Vryn delegate. You taught us how to crystallize at the molecular level, creating a texture we'd never achieved before. And the Talmor heat variation technique, that's what brings all the flavors together. Without both of your cultures contributing, this dish doesn't work, it's just chocolate. But with both, it becomes something transcendent. He gestured to the plates. Taste it, please. The Vryn delegate was first. He took a small piece of the dessert, his crystalline form processing it. Light pulsed through his structure in patterns Danny had never seen before, complex and beautiful. The Talmor delegate tasted hers, and her fur shifted through a rainbow of colors, finally settling on a warm gold that Danny's translator said meant profound satisfaction. You taste it? Danny asked quietly. You taste what happens when enemies become partners? When old grievances are set aside in favor of creating something new? The Vryn delegate set down his utensil slowly. I taste possibility. Flavors that should not work together but do. Contrasts that create harmony are one. That is what I taste as well, the Talmor delegate said. Her fur had calmed to softer colors. And it reminds me of something my grandmother once said. She lived through the war. She said the saddest part wasn't the fighting, it was forgetting that we had once been friends. Before the borders were drawn, before the resources became scarce, Vryn and Talmor traded freely. We shared music, art, and yes, food. We weren't enemies. We were neighbors. My grandfather said something similar, the Vryn delegate admitted. He had a Talmor friend before the war. They used to cook together, combining techniques from both cultures. He said those were some of the happiest memories of his life. The hall had gone completely silent. Everyone was watching the two delegates. The war is over, Danny said gently. It ended 30 years ago, but the peace has been cold, built on ceasefire agreements and border treaties. What if you built a different kind of peace? One based on this? He gestured to the dessert. On remembering what you once shared and can share again? The Vryn delegate turned to face the Talmor delegate directly. Their eyes met through the transparent barrier. I do not speak for my entire government, he said slowly. But I would like to learn your heat variation technique. If you would be willing to teach me. The Talmor delegate's fur rippled with emotion. I would be honored. And perhaps you could teach me your crystallization methods. I have been trying to achieve that effect for years. It wasn't a treaty. It wasn't a formal reconciliation. But it was a start, and sometimes, that's all you needed. The rest of the dessert course was served, and the mood in the hall transformed. Species that had been cordial became friendly. Conversations started about exchange programs, about chefs visiting each other's worlds, about cookbooks that would share techniques across cultures. By the time the meal ended, 5 hours after it had begun, Danny was exhausted, but elated. It had worked. Not perfectly. There had been awkward moments and near disasters, but it had worked. Vorthax found him in the kitchen, where Danny had collapsed into a chair. You did well, small friend. Very well. I almost lost it, Danny said. If that argument had gone on another minute, but it did not. You stopped it with wisdom food and truth speaking. You reminded them of what matters. Ambassador Winters appeared, grinning broadly. Danny, the council wants to make this an annual event. The Unity Feast, and they want to create a position, Cultural Integration Specialist, reporting directly to the council leadership. They want you to take it. Danny looked up at the ambassador, then at Vorthax, then at Shira, who had followed her father into the kitchen. What would I do? Exactly what you did tonight, Winters said. Travel the galaxy, teach cooking, learn from other cultures, help species find common ground through food. You'd be building bridges. One meal at a time. It was everything Danny had never known he wanted. A chance to see the galaxy, to meet new species, to learn and teach and create. But it was also overwhelming. the weight of it settling on his shoulders. You do not have to decide now. Vorthox rumbled. Rest first. Think. But know that whatever you choose, the Kirsha honor you. You gave us back our joy language. That gift can never be repaid. Danny stood up and walked to the kitchen window. Outside, he could see the delegates leaving, but they weren't rushing away. They were talking to each other, exchanging contact information, making plans. The Vryn and Talmor were walking together, their conversation animated and friendly. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. A supply officer on a damaged ship, carrying cooking supplies because he enjoyed it as a hobby. He had never imagined it would lead to this, to changing the galaxy, one recipe at a time. I'll take the position, Danny said quietly. On one condition. Name it, Winters said. Shira comes with me. And Vexil too, if he's willing. This shouldn't be just a human teaching the galaxy. It should be all of us. Learning from each other, teaching each other. Shira's scales erupted in pure gold light. I accept with joy honor, teacher. To travel the stars, sharing food language with new species, it is a dream I did not know I had. From the doorway, Vexil spoke up. Danny hadn't noticed him enter. Kraz Thor will approve. He says the Zrathians need to learn soft strength, not just hard power. I would be honored to join your mission. And so it was decided. 3 species, working together, would travel the galaxy teaching others what they had learned. That food was more than sustenance. It was communication, culture, identity, and love. When you shared a meal with someone, truly shared it, you shared a part of yourself. And once you had done that, it was much harder to hate, much easier to understand, much simpler to find peace. 6 months later, Danny stood in a teaching kitchen on a station in neutral space. His students were from 20 different species, all aspiring diplomats taking his course, Introduction to Culinary Diplomacy. Shira was demonstrating Kirsha techniques on one side of the room. Vexil was teaching Zrathian methods on the other, and Danny moved between them, guiding, encouraging, sharing what he had learned. The first rule, Danny told his students, is that there's no such thing as just food. Every meal tells a story. Every dish carries meaning. When you sit down to eat with someone, you're not just filling your stomach, you're building a relationship. And relationships are what hold the galaxy together, not treaties, or weapons, or borders. He looked around at his students, at their varied forms and faces and ways of being. Some would become great diplomats. Others would go home and simply cook better meals for their families. But all of them would carry with them the understanding that peace begins, not with grand gestures, but with small ones, with an invitation to dinner, with a willingness to share, with the simple question, "Are you hungry? Let me cook for you." Today, Danny continued, pulling out ingredients, we're going to learn to make the Unity dessert, the dish that helped end a 30-year Cold War between 2 species. And as we cook, I want you to think about this. What conflicts in your own lives, in your own worlds, might be solved not with arguments or force, but with a well-made meal shared in good faith? His students leaned in, eager and hungry, ready to learn. And Danny Harper, former supply officer turned chef turned galaxy-changing diplomat, began to teach. Because that's what he did now. He taught people that the best way to make friends was to make dinner. Everything else followed from there. The galaxy would never be perfect. There would still be conflicts, still be misunderstandings, still be species that couldn't find common ground. But it would be better, one meal at a time, one conversation at a time, one shared experience at a time, it would be better. And sometimes, that was enough. Sometimes, that was everything.